each of us carries a representation of systems of ideas in our imagination, in our mind. And those ideas are active within us. That's one way of thinking about it. And nobody is a 100% repository of all woke ideas. But so there's fragments of the woke net of ideas in any given individual. But if you get 20 people who have fragments of those ideas in their head all together in a room, then you have the whole goddamn woke catastrophe operating, and then it'll look like a conspiracy. And then you can take 20 different people, each of whom have fragments of the woke nonsense in their head, and put them in a different room, and they'll come up with the same decisions. There are these webs of ideas that, and in some sense, each of us acts as a neuron in a neuronal web when we're together in a group. And so then things look conspiratorial, but it's a consequence of the working out of the internal logic of systems of ideas. And so, and then it might be that each individual actor is fundamentally only concerned with not being held accountable for ever making any kind of mistake, which is a hell of a way to live your life. Certainly no way to live your life if you're a comedian or a man for that matter. Maybe not even a woman, not even. That should make me popular. It was an interesting thing for me to see how it kind of manifested. And I think that there is like an opposite version of that, because now I've seen like the conservative woke pop up. Are you familiar with this? What are you referring to?
I don't even know if I call it the conservative woke. It's a really interesting thing. I would almost call it like the counterculture brigade, which is like people who I think they were called conspiracy theorists, and now they're kind of like searching for a home. I think a lot of the support for Kanye even right now is he's just tapping into very niche beliefs, and a bunch of them at the same time that people have no representation for. And now he's the most famous person tapping into those groups, right? So he's like George Floyd really died of fentanyl. And now all the people that are anti-Black Matter, Black Lives Matter, they just hate the idea that there's anything else that killed him but his own choice to do fentanyl, are like, okay, Kanye's got it. And he also did a thing, he's all, the Jews run the banks, the Jews run all these things. So he's tapped into all these niche groups, and now he's become like their representative. But what I've noticed about these groups is that like, they're so scorned by maybe being lied to by the mainstream media or whatever it is, that their personality or identity has almost become the rejection thereof.
Yeah, well, that's always a threat that exists on the conservative side. The left-wingers always accuse the conservatives of being reactionary. And they're reactionary because they keep saying things like, you guys on the left, you're going too far. You got to slow down. You got to stop doing this. You're going too far. And that is reactionary in some sense, because they're always reacting to the excesses of the left. The conservative types tend not to want to change things. And, that can be their downfall too, because sometimes things have to change. Although intelligent conservatives sure know that. But it's hard for the conservatives to come up with a vision and to unite themselves because, well, first of all, they tend to stand for tradition, and it's not that easy to articulate traditional norms. And second, they do get reactionary, and that can turn into kind of a demented populism too, because the reactionary conservatives can go out and find the disaffected people on the right, and there's plenty of them now, and then capitalize on their resentment. I mean, Trump was pretty good at that in many ways, and continues to be so. And that's. I haven't been targeted particularly by the right, although I have to some degree years ago. When I first rose to whatever degree of notoriety I have now, a lot of the disaffected types on the right were also hoping that I'd be their guy. And same thing happened to Dan Crenshaw, the congressman, because he kind of he's got that evil right-wing supervillain appearance, if you in some sense. And they were kind of hoping he'd be their man, and he wasn't. And he actually gets targeted more by the conspiratorial right than he gets harassed by the left, which is quite the accomplishment on Crenshaw's part.
And he's a perfect example, because it's almost like this group of people who have felt so rejected by everything I'm talking about the extreme conservative. We need another term for it. Like, I don't like how liberal and conservative, it's too binary, because I don't even see like the extreme.
That's a woke thing
like,
to say.
Yeah, right? Now we're talking.
Yeah, good work, Andrew. Yeah, you see, you fell right into the clutches of that system of ideas.
I know.
It's too non-binary.
They get me.
Yeah.
But it's like, because I've seen the way that they went after Crenshaw when he disagreed, I think, about like gun rights or something like that. He was their champion as long as he said everything they agree with. And the second he diverted from their beliefs, he no longer was useful. And this happened to me. I didn't even know that this like cluster of people existed in this like organized way. But like, I did a rant where I went after Kanye, and I thought it was kind of a pretty easy thing to do. Here's a billionaire that said some awful things. I'm going to roast him with jokes. This is what I do. I think we can make fun of billionaires. I think they're okay to make fun of. And there was this like onslaught of comments about people saying, you got it wrong. It was, it's fentanyl that killed George Floyd. You got it wrong. The Jews do run the banks. They do these things. And I'm like, what is this group of people? And why are they so organized and hateful? And why is Kanye their new guy? And I started DMing some people that were like trashing me. And I was just like, explain like what you're upset about to me. I don't understand. Like, we're just making fun of like a really rich guy that said some awful things. And the reaction that every single one of them said was so funny. They're like, look, Kanye's an idiot, but he's right about these things. And they're basically saying anybody who agrees with me and is famous, I'm going to ride for as long as they agree with me. And second they divert.
The problem with social media is that you have to hear from people like that. Let me tell you a story. I was talking to Andy Ngo, the journalist who covers Antifa.
Yeah.
And I had been talking to some prominent Democrats about Antifa, and they said it doesn't exist. And I said, well, what do you mean it doesn't exist? It promoted riots in multiple American cities. There's people in black masks and uniforms that call themselves Antifa. How do you mean it doesn't exist? Say, well, there's hardly any of them. They're not really organized. They're not an official group. And they're they're such a tiny minority that they're negligible. And it didn't really appear to me that they were negligible, but these were respectable people and they weren't stupid. And I thought, okay, they probably have a reason for thinking this. So I asked Andy Ngo about this, because he knows more about Antifa than anyone else in the world. And I said, how many Antifa cells do you think there are, cells, so to speak, in the United States? And he thought, well, maybe 40. And I said, well, how many full-time equivalent employees do each of these cells have, so to speak, right? How many people in each city are devoting their lives to being Antifa, whatever that means? And he figured 20. And so that's 800 out of 300 million. It's 1 in 400,000. And so like that's none, right? In a city the size of Halifax, city many Americans probably don't know about, but it's a city of about 400,000 in Canada, you'd have one person. And like, in some ways that's zero people, right? It's just no one.
Right.
But the problem is that a very tiny number of people can cause a tremendous amount of problems, a tremendous amount of trouble. Maybe enough trouble to bring down a whole civilization. Maybe it only takes 1 in 100,000 to do that, especially if they're organized. And now with social media, well, they're always organized, because no matter how peculiar you are, you can find another 100 dimwits exactly like you on the net. And then you start to think that, well, you've got something there. And, in some ways that's a plus, because disaffected people can find a community. But man, it depends on who the disaffected people are and exactly what the community is up to.